anyone would ever want to imagine, much less actually see and, God forbid, experience. A baby, an infant, riddled with bullets. Soldiers beheaded. Young people burned alive in their cars or in their hideaway rooms. I could go on, but it's simply depravity in the worst imaginable way. You can't help but imagine yourself, your family, your loved ones, your friends in that situation, in that predicament. And maybe the best word for it for me is overwhelming.
We've just learned that after his visit to Israel, Blinken will go to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, and Qatar to continue working diplomatic channels as the fight rages on and the effort to get hostages home continues. Let's take you now to Ashdod, Israel, with CNN's Jeremy Diamond. And Jeremy, you've been in and out of cover throughout the entire day. What does it look like where you are now?
Yeah, Boris, this evening we had not one but two different barrages of rockets headed towards the city of Ashdod. The second one was very, very close to our hotel. The booms that you hear when those Iron Dome missiles intercept the rockets were particularly loud, indicating their proximity to our location. We went into the shelter on our floor, and in there we saw a family that has fled the city of Ashkelon, which is the nearest city to me, between me and the Gaza Strip. Ashkelon has been one of the hardest hit cities from those Hamas rocket barrages, and this family fled to this hotel here in Ashdod, hoping to find a sense of security, and also because they don't have one of those bomb shelters inside of their home. And the father told me that he came because his children simply could not sleep because of how afraid they were in hearing those booms over the last several days. Now, at the same time, from this very position where we are, we can hear the constant rumbling of airstrikes and artillery hitting the Gaza Strip. It actually shakes the windows here sometimes when you have a particularly heavy explosion inside of Gaza. And the death toll in Gaza has been consistently rising. More than 1,400 people have now been killed inside of Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. And there is no question that as we look towards the next phase of this Israeli military campaign, their response to those devastating Hamas terrorist attacks over the weekend, the civilian death toll in Gaza is sure to rise. That is just the nature of this conflict every time there are attacks there. And beyond, of course, the explosions, we know that Israel is also not allowing food, water, or electricity or fuel into the Gaza Strip, causing precarious humanitarian situation with which the top UN human rights official has called out as a violation of international law. So whatever happens next, Boris, very clear that this remains an extremely precarious situation, both inside the Gaza Strip, but also here in Israel, or in these communities near to Gaza.
Jeremy, as you were listening to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken there, what stood out to you from his comments standing side by side with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, I think the Secretary of State, just like the Israeli Prime Minister, were really trying to capture the emotion, the outrage, the devastation as it relates to the brutality of those Hamas terrorist attacks over the weekend, details of which we are still continuing to learn in recent days. The killing of women and children inside of their homes. But what they are also doing is they are taking that outrage, they are taking that emotion, bottling it up, and really sending it out to the public, to the world, perhaps to try and provide a rationale for what is sure to come next, which is a much wider scale Israeli military response to those terrorist attacks, with the overwhelming speculation leading to the possibility that there could be a ground invasion of Gaza. And if indeed that is the case, if that is the direction in which we move, the Israeli Prime Minister has to prepare the public here that there will be IDF casualties with a ground invasion, and also preparing the world for the fact that there will be casualties inside of Gaza, and we know the death toll will mount. What is very clear is that regardless of what comes next, it will be civilians who are too often caught in the crossfire. Boris?
Yeah, the potential for that ground operation to cause enormous losses, very high. Jeremy Diamond from Ashdod, Israel. Thank you so much. So Israel's energy minister is now warning that Gaza will not get any power, water, or fuel until the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas are returned home. Joining me now is Michael Milstein, a former head of the Palestinian Department and Israeli military intelligence. Michael, thank you so much for being with us. Do you think that strategy...
Thank you, Boris.
Of course. Do you think that strategy is likely going to be effective in getting back those hostages?
Well, I think, Boris, that this kind of strategy with Israel has never promoted such a strategy is actually the new but the only way to achieve anything important in Gaza. You know, till today, during the last 2 years, Israel tried to promote a unique policy toward Gaza, which actually we realized on the 7th of October at 6:30 in the morning that it was totally failure, and I'm meaning that a policy that is based on improvement of the economic of the civil situation in Gaza in order actually to create a prize, you know, something that Hamas could lose if he will promote any escalation. And right now, I think that, you know, in the horrible situation we found ourselves, actually, this is the only way to really to push Hamas. And only this evening, we heard Saleh Aoud, number 2 in Hamas leadership, declare that actually Hamas members, Hamas terrorists from the military wing were not involved in killing, slaughtering civilians in Israel, but it was civilians from Gaza. So he's trying actually, you know, to change the damage in the image of Hamas. But I really hope that those steps, I mean, you know, banning water and electricity and other things will cause unrest, will cause protest among the citizens of Gaza, and maybe now, finally, they will understand that their worst enemy is Hamas, and the source for all their suffer is Hamas. And I think that this is the only option Israel has today.
So, Michael, this morning, Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoed remarks from President Biden, his pledge of U.S. unconditional support for Israel. He said, quote, "We will always be there by your side." He also talked about the need for moral clarity, the importance of separating the Palestinian people from Hamas. You were just making the argument that leadership in Hamas is trying to muddy the waters and blur those lines. There are some 2 million Palestinians packed into a tiny sliver of land that is Gaza. Many of them are just women and children that had nothing to do with the atrocities that we saw over the weekend. How does the IDF go about trying to ensure that innocent people aren't hurt?
You know, first of all, Boris, we must emphasize that the IDF attacks on Gaza right now is not a blind attack. We are trying to be very accurate, and of course, Israel has no interest to harm any citizens. But in the current situation, no, in the past, we believed that if there will be any escalation, the public will promote protest against Hamas, so Hamas won't have any interest to promote escalation. And this assumption was totally wrong. Right now, you know, citizens from Gaza were involved in looting the villages, the kibbutzim and the moshavim nearby the border. They were also participated in all those really crazy events in Gaza when they showed the corpse of Israeli soldiers and citizens. You know, those are the people that Israel is trying to improve their situation. And I think that, you know, after Saturday, there are less and less Israelis who can really understand what is the basic logic of the Palestinian people, not of Hamas. And less Israelis believe that if you will improve the situation of the Palestinians in Gaza, so there will be less interest in promoting the escalation. potential fight, and therefore we will attempt any effort not to harm citizens. But we must understand that this kind of conflict is different from the conflicts of the past, and this time we cannot end this conflict while Hamas is in the same situation as it was a week before.
So, Michael, given your former position as the head of Palestinian affairs and Israeli intelligence, and given some of what you've described as a misled belief among Israelis that providing Gaza and Hamas with economic incentives would promote peace, what do you make of the fact that there was such a colossal intelligence failure in Israel that could have indicated that an attack like this was imminent?
Well, it's a very good point, and in Israel, most of the public discourse and the political discourse is focused on this issue, Boris. We're speaking about two things. First of all is the intelligence failure to recognize actually all the signals. During the last day, we understood that those signals were elaborated only a few hours before the offensive began, and it was quite too late to do something. But the other failure actually is connected or regard to the question of the intentions of Hamas. The basic assumption regarding Hamas was that this organization is very much deterred. It has no interest in promoting escalation. And of course, this assumption was really wrong, because I think that I would call it, we thought in a Western style patterns, and we actually enforced our way of thinking on the other side, on an Islamic radical organization whose basic aim is actually to eradicate Israel from the map. He has no intention to take care of the Palestinians in the territories, of the life of the people in Gaza. His basic aim is to promote jihad, mukawama, resistance. And so in the morning of Saturday, we realized the basic deep DNA of Hamas.
Michael Milstein, we very much appreciate you sharing your perspectives with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Boris.
Of course. We want to take you straight to the White House now, the press room there, where NSC spokesperson John Kirby is giving remarks. Let's listen in.
I'll start with the saddest of news. We can now update the number of Americans that we know have been killed to accounted for stands today at 14. We're obviously doing everything we can to support and inform the families. Now, sadly, 5 more families have now gotten the worst possible news that any family can conceive of getting. And we're going to stay in touch with them as appropriate. Same goes for those family members of those who are unaccounted for. And by unaccounted for, we mean that. We don't know where they are. They don't know where they are. So we're going to obviously stay in touch with them as well. And certainly we're continuing to work with Israeli officials to make sure that we're getting as much context and information as possible that we will share with them. Also, as you, I think, realize, we are all acutely aware of limited availability right now on commercial flights out of Israel, and the demand signal by U.S. citizens who may want to depart. The President has asked his team to ensure that we are assisting U.S. citizens who do want to leave Israel and providing them with a safe means of doing that. So beginning tomorrow, the United States government will arrange charter flights to provide transportation from Israel to sites in Europe. They're still working through some of the details of that to assist U.S. citizens and their immediate family members who have, for whatever reason, not been able to provide commercial transit out of the country. And I would add that we're also exploring other options to expand the capacity of doing this, including exploring whether it's possible to help Americans leave by land and by sea. So again, we're working hard on this. We know there's a demand signal out there, and we're going to try the best we can to meet it. I would encourage any American citizen in the need of assistance to please complete the intake form that you can find on travel.state.gov. It's very simple. Go right to that site. There is an intake form. Fill it out. It helps us get a sense of what the scope of the need is. And I would refer you to state on that. I'm sure you guys are going to ask me that. I don't have hard figures handy with me now. We do know there are certain American citizens that want to go. It's all available through the State Department's website, and I'd encourage them to go look at that.
Right. Okay. Thanks for taking my question. Gaza's main power plant has run out of fuel. The humanitarian situation there is becoming quite dire. I'm wondering if there have been any communications about allowing shipments of food, fuel, electricity to help lessen civilian casualties and suffering there.
Yes, there have been ongoing conversations with our Israeli counterparts about the need for continued flow of humanitarian assistance.
I had a couple of questions on the American hostages. Is it still the case that the administration doesn't know anything about the condition of the American hostages, and is the number still believed to be less than a handful?
Yes and yes.
And I know you've been pretty open about the fact that it's hard to ascertain at this moment. The limited information that you do have, is that coming mainly from the Israelis and the Qataris, or are there another source of information that you view?
The families too. I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, some of these families actually saw their loved ones being abducted and taken away, so they have been a significant source of information as well.
Just one other quick thing. The assumption that the hostages may not necessarily be in one place, was there specific intelligence to point the administration to not make that assumption, or is that based on something else?
I won't speak about specific intelligence matters, but it is a common tactic in the Hamas playbook to break up hostages and move them around in sometimes small groups. So we have nothing that would indicate to us that they would follow a different set of protocols, but I can't stand here before you and prove to you that that is exactly what's happening. We have to, in order to think about our policy options, you have to make some assumptions, and we can't rule that out as a possibility.
Jewish audience question. Thank you, John. What is the status of the $6 billion that Iran was set to have access to?
It's still sitting in the Qatari bank. All of it. Every dime of it.
Is there an agreement now to, in essence, withhold it from Iran should they come asking for it?
None of that money has been spent, and I have no updates to provide today.
Was the decision to reach a quiet understanding with Qatar about whether or not it would be accessed by Iran made because of the attack or political pressure recently?
I'm not going to talk about diplomatic conversations one way or another, Ed. What I can tell you is that every single dime of that money is still sitting in the Qatari bank. Not one dime of it has been spent. I'd also remind, because this key, in certain audiences, inconvenient facts are easy to forget. The regime was never going to see a dime of that money. And this account, although it's moved from South Korea to Qatar, was set up by the previous administration for this exact purpose. In fact, I think it was back in 2018, the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, actually talked in quite some detail about how this money in these accounts could only be used for humanitarian purposes and that there was going to be oversight. We've done nothing different. It is the same process. All we've done is move that funds from South Korea, where for some technical reasons it wasn't accessible, to Qatar, where it is more accessible. All that said, none of it has been accessed by the Iranian, by Iran at all. And even if they had accessed it, it wouldn't go to the regime. It would go to approved vendors that we approved to go buy food, medicine, and medical equipment, agricultural products, and ship it into Iran directly to the benefit of the Iranian people.
Let me ask you one other. Has the United States independently verified the photos released by the Israeli Prime Minister's Twitter account today showing the images of dead children?
I don't think we're going to be in the business of having to validate or approve those images. Are coming from the Prime Minister of Israel, and we have absolutely no reason to doubt their authenticity.
Jewish audience question, please.
To follow up on these questions about the $6 billion, I understand Iran hasn't accessed any of this yet. It's intended for humanitarian purposes, but there have been reports of this quiet agreement. So, yes or no, if Iran wanted to access this today, could they?
I'm not going to speculate one way or another here about future transactions. What I can tell you is none of it has been accessed, and we are watching every dime, as you would expect we would. We're watching it very, very closely.
You're
And
not gonna still tap into it.
I'm not in a position to speak about these press reports. I'm telling you, nothing's been accessed, and we have oversight. We have oversight over what can be accessed and for what purposes.
And on another topic, the president said yesterday that he told Netanyahu that it's important, even with all of the emotion and anger and frustration, that they operate by the rules of war. Why does the president feel the need to underscore this point?
The president feels strongly about the law of armed conflict and the proper respect for innocent life anywhere in the world, no matter where it is. And that certainly includes, maybe even especially includes our own military operations.
But is the president worried that Israel may have already violated the rules of war, or that they might going forward?
It's just part of the conversations that we've been having with our Israeli counterparts about the prosecution of these military operations. The Palestinian people are likewise innocent civilians. They didn't ask Hamas to come in and do this, and I think it's always on the president's mind, the protection of civilian life.
And one last quick thing, I'm wondering what you made of the former president last night, calling the Israeli defense minister a jerk, saying that Hezbollah was really very smart.
I'm not going to comment about comments on the campaign trail. That's well beyond the pale for me.
Yeah, Jeff.
Thank you. Kirby, can you give us an update on the intelligence about Iran's role in this? Anything changing in terms of what you're seeing, what the U.S. assesses to be Iran's role?
No, I don't have any updates for you. We're still looking into this, but again, no direct evidence that Iran was a participant in these attacks in any way. But again, we're still monitoring it. We're still looking at it. And if I can go back, Mary, just while I'm not going to comment, I would just add that we take seriously our bilateral relationship with Israel. Now, we don't get to decide, obviously, who their cabinet officials are. That wouldn't be our business. But we have strong relationships with them, and it's important now that those relationships continue to improve and grow, particularly in this time of crisis. And so we're focused on getting things done and supporting Israel. That's where our heads are.
Yeah, thanks, Green. Admiral, speaking of Iran, what did President Biden mean yesterday in his remarks when he said he, quote, made it clear to Iranians?
It refers precisely to his comments the day before about not wanting to see any third party, be it a terrorist group or a nation state, that might have hostile feelings towards Israel, but thinking that this might be a good time to take advantage of that and to widen and expand the conflict. Very much in keeping with what he said the day before.
Well, was that message communicated to Iran, or?
The President of the United States said it publicly. I think that's pretty good communication.
Question, please.
Anything said publicly by the President of the United States of America is pretty good communication. So since it was said publicly by the President of the United States the day before and the day before that, no third party nation state or non-nation state should take advantage of the situation going on with Israel and its target of Hamas for the massacre and mess they caused on Saturday with the killing and mutilation of so many people in Israel. Yes, a public statement should be enough to get through as a message to Iran or any other nation state or non-nation terrorist state to not interfere with what's going on. That should be clear enough.
Gotta continue to make sure they have the support that they need.
Was the president actually seeing the photos yesterday? There was
a couple of follow-up questions actually to what Mary has been asking. Regarding the issue about abiding by the laws of war, Israel does continue to halt supplies of food, other aid materials to Gaza. So I'm wondering if the U.S. feels that is an appropriate action by the Israelis, and if you made any concerns about that to the Israeli government.
We are having conversations with Israeli officials about the continued need for humanitarian assistance for the Palestinian people who are victims here as well.
Does the U.S. see that as any sort of a violation of the law?
I'm not going to stand up here and put a bumper sticker on it. We are having active conversations as we would anywhere around the world with their Israeli counterparts.
And regarding the former president's comments last night, setting aside the politics of it, do you have any concern that he may have revealed classified information as it relates to the death of Soleimani in 2020 in his comments last night?
I'm not in a position to comment on that right now.
Jackie. Thank you, Kareem. Sean, one quick one on the charter flights. Are those free of cost to American citizens now?
I would refer you to the State Department. Typically they are, but I mean, I don't have they're still working through the details of how they're going to coordinate these.
And then on the $6 billion, we know that 100 senators were told on Tuesday night that the plan was basically to leave any requests for withdrawals pending indefinitely. And now we know that House Democrats were told by the Deputy Treasury Secretary behind closed doors this morning pretty much the same, with one added layer that there's an agreement with Qatar not to let those funds be dispersed. Why is it that you won't come out and say that the U.S. does not intend to let this money go to Iran?
Jackie, we've always had, since the beginning, we've always had the ability to provide oversight over the disbursement of these funds. We've always had the option, if we wanted it, to look at transactions and to make a call about whether we found it valid or not. That has not changed. And even now, as you and I are speaking, none of that money has been accessed by anybody. It's still all there.
Is it because we think that freezing it essentially again would complicate any negotiations with Iran or our ability to get Americans home in the future?
I'm not going to go into any more detail.
Okay, and then on the overland and by sea and by land efforts, I guess why is it that we find ourselves in so many situations trying to get Americans out, and that it's largely happening, not through a government effort, but we're telling, civilians to find their way across a border in a war zone. Happened in Ukraine, why is it that we found ourselves in that position so many times, it seems?
In what position exactly?
So we're directing American citizens to basically find their own way to U.S. help on the other side, whereas you've got other countries that are sending their military in or doing evacuations in a more formal way.
Well, first of all, Americans and dual passport holders live all over the world, and sometimes they choose to live in places where bad things happen. We're not in a position of lecturing to Americans where they can go live, work, and travel, and recreate. Number two, they don't have to tell us that they're there. So sometimes it's really hard to get a sense of what the population is. In places like Israel, there are a lot of Americans. Most of them are maybe most are dual nationals, but a lot of Americans are there. Other nations have smaller populations, and maybe they have to make their own decisions about how they're going to handle those smaller populations. We also have to be respectful of the needs and the desires of Americans who live there. We know that some want to leave. We also know that a lot of them want to stay. It's home. They don't want to go. And we have to respect that as well. So we tailor the approach based on what's going on and what's going on geographically inside a country, because some parts of countries that are in distress are safer than others, and people are less likely to want to go. You have to take all that into consideration. And the other thing I'd say to your question is, as this situation evolves, you should expect that so too will our approach evolve. And if there's a need to do more or to do it differently, by goodness, we'll do that. But right now, in the early hours, there was still ample commercial flights going out of Ben Gurion, and certainly there were some viable land routes. We kept, and part of the reason why we're doing this is because we have such good communication with Americans, and we're having these conversations, and we realized that as the situation has evolved, more and more Americans were expressing a desire to leave, and because not all carriers are working out of Ben Gurion, this made sense as the next best move. If we have to adjust it, we absolutely will.
On the day of jihad, are we doing anything to fortify, the U.S. against any potential activity against Americans, domestically or abroad, given the calls for a day of jihad and your statement yesterday that now is not to go back and look at any intelligence gaps? Is it the time, being that tomorrow is supposed to be this day of jihad?
What I meant yesterday was we're focused on making sure that our intelligence sharing with the Israelis is as sharp and as good as possible for the operations that they are in. I saw some reporting that made it sound like I blew it off. That is not the case. We understand that there will be a need to go back and look at what was missed, by whom and when. Of course we're going to do that. But we've got to stay focused on the task at hand right now. And as for your second question, absolutely, we are constantly in touch with local law enforcement, state and federal officials across the country to make sure that we are as vigilant as we can be to be able to identify and disrupt any threats to the American people. We're absolutely going to stay focused on that.
John, is the concern about publicly addressing the $6 million as now being frozen a concern that it would suggest culpability on the part of Iran on these specific events? And is that too volatile a statement for the U.S. government to make publicly, since clearly it's being communicated privately to lawmakers and others?
Again, I don't have anything more to add on this, Kelly. All I can tell you is we haven't seen any specific evidence that Iran was involved specifically with these attacks. But as we've said, broadly, yes, they're certainly complicit. We're not walking away from the fact that Iran has supported Hamas and other terrorist networks. So this is not about being unwilling to speak to culpability. We've already spoken to the culpability and complicity of Iran with respect to support to terrorist groups. I'm just not able to go into more detail than that. I would tell you that, again, I'll remind that.
We've been listening to NSC spokesperson John Kirby from the podium in the press room at the White House discussing the ongoing situation in Israel. The NSC spokesperson answering reporters' questions. We're going to keep monitoring that. Just some highlights. He confirmed at least 27 Americans have been killed in the Hamas attacks over the weekend. 14 remain unaccounted for, though the NSC spokesperson says he believes that fewer than a handful are currently being held hostage by Hamas. He expressed that the United States is now mobilizing an effort to learn more information sharing with Israel to get a sense of where they may be, exactly how many there may be, and to move forward in recovering those hostages. He also talked about trying to offer resources to Americans currently in Israel experiencing difficulty in trying to get out. And notably, he was asked repeatedly about reporting that is circulating that there was an agreement with Qatar to hold on to $6 billion worth of Iranian money that the United States recently unfroze as part of a negotiated deal to release Americans that had been detained in Iran. He refused to get into that reporting. He did say not a single dollar of that money has been spent. Obviously, there are so many questions over just how involved Iran may have been in the attacks over the weekend. We want to get some perspective on not only what we just heard from John Kirby, but also some battlefield perspective as well from CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Colonel Leighton, thanks so much for being with us. What of what John Kirby said stood out to you?
Well, one of the things, in addition to all the things that you mentioned, Boris, was the allusion to the laws of armed conflict and words by both the Secretary of State and the President of the United States that Israel must follow the rules of armed conflict. The White House was, I think, trying to make sure that that message got out without making it too public. But the fact of the matter is there is some concern that Israel will not follow the same rules like we're used to, for example, if the American military goes in there. And the concern, I think, on the White House's part is that it look good in the sense that if Israel goes in to a ground invasion, if they actually go into Gaza like that they do it under the strictest control without a minimum of civilian casualties.
Yeah, that is a major concern going into an area like Gaza, a very tight strip of land with over 2 million people in it. Let's talk about the timeline of a potential ground operation, because we're seeing not only a massive number of troops being amassed at the border with Gaza, but tanks, howitzers as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's start with the howitzers. We've got right here along the Gaza border, you have Israeli howitzers. They have a range of somewhere around 25 miles, and the basic area that they're covering is about this area right in here, this part of Gaza, the very northern part of the area. And when you look at that, there are going to be some things that they're going to have to deal with as they go into this. If you go into an urban warfare environment, you've got to deal with rockets from the other side. You've got to deal with drones from their side. Your drones may also be impacted by that if you're in Israeli. Tunnels are going to be a major factor. Anti-armor attacks could very easily happen, and tanks are going to be actually a major effort in any type of scenario here. Tanks like the Merkava tanks that the Israelis use are going to be present in any type of urban warfare environment, and they're going to be present on almost any battlefield that you have out there, whether it's in the north or in the south.
I'm glad you said that, because I believe this video is actually from Israel's border with Lebanon.
That is correct,
And
yes.
there are concerns, if we can go to a map quickly, about Israel fighting a war on multiple fronts, because you not only have the ongoing situation in Gaza, you also have Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Golan Heights in that area near Syria. There are obviously groups that are anti-Israel there, the West Bank. The IDF could be stretched thin, no?
Absolutely, and this has happened historically before. This happened in 1948 when Israel was started, happened in 1956, happened in 1967, and to an extent in 1973 as well. So in each of these cases, the exact nations varied a bit, but basically from Syria and from Egypt, you had forces coming into those areas. So Israel has had historical experience with that. But now what they're dealing with is threats from Gaza, potentially threats from the West Bank, and potentially threats from Lebanon, and possibly threats from external elements in Syria. So those are the things that would concern them most, and that is the kind of environment that Israel finds itself in at this point.
Yeah, and to get back to the point you were making a moment ago about the White House sort of expressing concern over the innocent people in Gaza, again, women and children that had nothing to do with the attacks over the weekend, what steps can the IDF take to try to save and preserve innocent life?
So the key thing is how you do your targeting process. It has to be very intelligence-centric, and by intelligence, I mean intelligence that not only takes into account the military aspect, but also where the civilian population is located, where the hospitals are, where the mosques are. Are the mosques being used for only legitimate purposes, same with the hospitals, or are they also being used to house Hamas elements? And that has happened before, where all of a sudden a hospital will become a legitimate target because it is being used by the opposite side, by the adversary. And that is something that has to be sorted out, and it's very complex, but it has to be done in a legal manner, and it has to be done very thoroughly. And even with all the oversight in the world, mistakes are still possible.
As we've seen historically with Hamas, they don't mind muddying the waters of what is a military target and a civilian one. Colonel Cedric Layton, we very much appreciate the perspective. Thank you, sir.
You bet, Boris.
Still much more to come. Our special live coverage of Israel at war continues after a quick break.
There's challenges, and I love overcoming challenges.
Hamas doesn't mind muddying the waters between what is a military target and what is a civilian one. A song by Paul Beckman, Polly Rainbow Song. Also the new and first leader of humankind in the free world. Created October 12th, 2023. Hamas doesn't mind muddying the waters. Hamas doesn't mind muddying the waters between what is a legitimate military target and what is a civilian one. What's a civilian one? Hamas doesn't mind muddying the waters between what one may appear to be. Yeah, they might go ahead and put civilians in a military target, or they might put Hamas fighters in a civilian one, muddying the waters for everyone. Sounds like Hamas's strategy. It does no one any good. That's probably why they do it. Muddying the waters. Tricky coyote, Hamas They'll still get you. Yeah, they'll still get you.